Norman Armour, who's going to speak first, the Artistic and Executive Director of the Push International Performing Arts Festival, which because I am on the board of the Push Festival, I have some insight, I think, into what Norman is going to share with you, including some interesting choices that Push made around scaling back during the Olympics year, and what one does with that pile of money that all of a sudden is there, and how does one use that as a legacy moving forward post-Olympics. To Norman's left, Michael Boucher, Director of Cultural Programs here at SFU, who opened this building during the Olympics, which in and of itself, talking about bricks and mortar and putting actual seats into a theater to show Robert Lepage's The Blue Dragon was an extraordinary event. And so how do you build a program and build on a legacy of an Olympic program for an institution like this, which is educational on the one hand, but is also supposed to be sustainable in terms of presenting new work. And then finally, to my immediate left, Jeff McMurchie, founder of Kickstart Disability Arts and Culture Festival here in Vancouver, who's going to give some important perspective around both that festival and also partnerships during the Olympics, including, we heard a little bit about Real Wheels and Spine, which took place here. So each presenter, I've told, has 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a good half hour for discussion. So first off, Norman Armour.
Well, first off, I just want to actually thank Peter and everybody who's been involved in making this happen. I said to Peter outside that I don't wake up in the morning thinking of these types of things to spend my time at, so I would be lying if I said I was a hardcore conference person. But I think they're really absolutely important and significant. In terms of going behind the scenes, in terms of talking about the larger ideas than just simply producing the show, as Peter referred to. For us in the Push Festival, I sort of broke this up into sort of a few different ways of thinking about it. One, which was the lead up to it. Two, which was what we did to respond to perhaps some of the challenges and opportunities and threats that existed with the Cultural Olympiad. The agreement, this sounds like some kind of documentary here, but the agreement, and then what actually sort of happened, and I think there were some surprising things that actually when it did happen, when the circus came to town. What resulted from my perspective and the Push Festival's perspective, and perhaps, is there really anything that exists now today that didn't exist or wouldn't have existed without the Cultural Olympiad perhaps having happened. So what was perhaps the result or the impact for us, and for, again, a limited perspective of myself and the Push Festival. So the biggest thing for me, thinking back about this, that I have some kind of vague memory of was the lead up. We took about 2 years to 3 years thinking about this, and it was partly sort of instigated by, of course, the Cultural Olympiad and Robert and others getting this idea out into the community that brought it aware to us. Some of the things that we were thinking about in the lead-up, and in fact, all of the things that we thought about in the lead-up had really to do with mitigating risk, to be honest. It took a long time for me to personally come around and look at opportunity. And I mean by risk, I mean programming. A major presenter new presenter is going to establish themselves in your marketplace, in your time slot, because we were actually literally right at that time in January, February. Questions around access to equipment, question of access to hotel rooms, question of access to audiences or retention of audiences, and the question of access or retention of the media, the local media. All of these things that I think are a challenge regardless in this community, and can be a perceived challenge depending on how kind of optimistic you are about this marketplace or this region and its challenges around. And funding would be probably the one I didn't list there. Were heightened for us by the question of the Olympics. Would there be money around for us? Would there be audiences for us? Would there be the media? Would they care at all? Would we be able to get a hotel room? Could we rent a speaker? And these were, conspiracy theories or notions of end of times. These were realities in other places in the world where events like this have been carried off. In Australia, certainly, with the question of vehicles and those types of things. So we spent a good 2 years at least asking ourselves every day, how were we doing with these things? Did we have a response to it? Was it a reality or not? Was there something that was actually going to become much more of a challenge than we could have ever imagined? The most single thing that we did in terms of responding to on the kind of mitigation of risk side for us was to actually do less. Some of it was somewhat enforced upon us by circumstance. We normally do an assembly, which is an industry event that's inviting presenters and such. That requires a kind of free-flowing access to hotel rooms that we didn't either have the chutzpah to pull off or such, or didn't feel that we had actually the manpower to do that on top of securing rooms for artists. So there was a kind of very quick and early discussion with the Cultural Olympiad of whether we would work together on some kind of industry thing. And it became apparent, I think, from both sides, for different reasons, that that wasn't really sort of going to be a focus. So we let that go. The second thing we did is we dropped our club. The club also it works in much shorter timelines, Club Push, which continues today. It's had last year its fifth performance, or fifth year. But it requires a much shorter timeline than our other planning, which can be anywhere from 12 months to 2 years. With the club, it can be as short as 6 months when you're locking down things. And so access again to hotel rooms, we weren't willing to risk that we couldn't actually find places to put people. We were also looking for support from the Cultural Olympiad, and they gave us significant support. Robert's here today. And we were very grateful for that support. They weren't at that time in addition to what we were asking for and looking at supporting the club, and that was fine. So we let the club go for a bit. It actually gave us a bit of a break to reflect upon a new initiative, which was significant for us, and at that time was only had about 2 or 3 years going. It was a chance to sit back from it. And we did, I think, about 4 less on the main program, roughly. I have numbers actually here on audiences and budgets. This was done for some other purpose, capacity and attendance. But we did about 12 shows. Normally, we were at that time doing around 16 or so. And then, of course, the assembly and the club. This was the image on the program guide. This was not a Cultural Olympiad show. We put this on the cover not to sell this show because it actually only sat 90 people. It also was about a serial killer in the United States and doing things with puppets that I won't repeat right now. Very, very dark, dangerous show. And we did everything we could inside this program guide to say if this smells anything like you think it might, stay away. It's not for you. In fact, we had one audience member faint trying to leave. And that's not uncommon in this show, Jerk. Happens about every city that it's been done in. I point this out because we were faced with this situation of being right in the center of all of that activity that was happening. And we were faced with this question of how and what way do we relate to it, what way do we work with it, and what way do we protect ourselves. In the end, we had an agreement that was about $125,000 of pure cash straight out. We had essentially, I think, 7 productions. They went everything from Nevermore, which was Catalyst Theatre in Alberta, White Cabin, a Russian company, Aka, Poetics, Ballet Brut, which is from New York, Nature Theatre of Oklahoma, Passion of Joan of Arc, which was a commissioned score, new score for the Dreyer silent film that was done at the Christ Church Cathedral on Georgia Street. Best Before, which was a commissioned work of Rimini Protocol. China, which was William Yang from Australia. And then Comp, which was Hotel Moderne from Amsterdam, I believe they're based out of. The single most thing that I think about in terms of what we carried off that year, which the Cultural Olympiad allowed us to do, was work of a certain scale. There were productions that we presented that we had never done before, that we couldn't have imagined ever doing. Some of them were community engaged aspects, or had aspects of community engagement. Poetics Ballet Brut was one. It involved a lot of dancers in it and things, and had them in for a number of extra days. And that's, as a presenter, having people in for hotel nights and per diems is a big part of what your cost is. Best Before, which was a commission, probably our first real big invested commission. And subsequently to the festival, it actually toured around the world. And we also brought in a significant Germany company to carry off that work, Remedy Protocol, collective that continues today, is probably one of the darlings of Europe. And China, we brought back an artist who doesn't. Duncan's here in the audience, Duncan Lowe. He knows William Yang doesn't draw a big audience. His work is stunning and beautiful, but it just doesn't get a large audience, so it helped us to underwrite that. But most significantly, I would say, would be Comp. Comp was a piece about Auschwitz. Sat, in our instance, about 150 people at the Roundhouse, 3,000 tiny figures on stage. I think 3 performers who moved around the stage with tiny cameras like reporters, creating action and following action that was happening with sound, no text or dialogue, projected on the back wall. That piece, I can't remember a show that we've turned people away more and more and more and more and constantly. It was a piece that, for us as a presenter and a producer of the festival, brought together audiences on content, brought them together on the aesthetic innovation, brought them together on the daringness of it, the audaciousness of it, and the courage to take a topic as dark as that and to honor it properly. That production would have been impossible for us to have carried off without the involvement of the Cultural Olympiad, or a partnership with the Cultural Olympiad. The interesting thing is that I had, around this thing of doing less and less, I had constantly media interviews of saying, so what does it feel like? It's just so much bigger this year, the festival. And eventually I had to ask one of them, I don't know, it was the Georgia Straight or the Vancouver Sun, and I said, okay, I got to tell you the truth here. We're doing 4 less shows than we did last year. We're not doing the Assembly. We're not doing the club. Why is this somewhat the thing that you think is bigger? And I can't remember their answer, I'm sure probably because it wasn't very satisfactory, but I think what it was is it had to do with scale. I think The Passion of Joan of Arc was a thing of scale. Stefan Shimolovitz was of a scale in tackling this iconic work in this extraordinary church with an ensemble, with the organ that had been recently restored, with the singers, with the conductor, who was Giorgio Magnanensi, and a sold-out evening. I'm not sure maybe if we did 2 evenings. I think we did 2 maybe. No, we did 1. We chose to do 1, not 2. I think it was Comp. I think it was the scale of what that artistic project was. I think it was Best Before, which wasn't, frankly, one of my favorite shows of the Push Festival's history. But it was the scale of the attempt to bring in these senior artists, mid-career artists from Europe, and to bring them into town for extended periods of time to develop this work that hopefully, and I think failed in many ways, but to wrestle with some things that were perhaps characteristic or iconic to Vancouver, basically video gaming. What happened? Well, we still exist today, so we didn't die. We didn't lose our shirts. We did fine in terms of our box office projections. We kept them down as well, though. But what was most surprising to me is that locally, the suppliers of hotel rooms and suppliers of equipment, they all realized that after 2010, we were all going to be here. So were we really going to kind of just dump each other? Were we really going to just say, screw you, I'm going to make money this year. I'll talk to you next year when I need you. And we found it time and time again, actually, the local suppliers stood with us as long as we talked to them in advance, as long as we kind of worked with them to figure out and not screw them up in terms of where they could really make some money and such. So there was a kind of banding together locally of how to take advantage of, but also, frankly, to weather this influx of activity, which would go away at a certain point in time. What did I feel resulted out of it? I think, you know, I think they baseball talk about the big show, you go from AAA to the big show. Well, it was the big show, I think our organization became more confident out of it. Our organization became better as a negotiator. I think we became better as a partner, actually, in understanding what that meant to really work with an organization and an entity that was certainly bigger than us, definitely, and had a lot more power and a lot more heft, but to actually retain who we were. I mean, there was at one point an interest and a desire to have the show must go on in the festival, and we said no. That was actually, in fact, the first performance here in the May and the Fay and Milton Wong Theatre, Experimental Theatre. And there were many reasons why we said no. But at the same time, we were able to bring to the table things that we felt certainly addressed the desires and some of the spoken interests of the Cultural Olympiad. I think that, we came out with a sense of internationalism that perhaps we didn't have before. We had an awareness of it, but what it plays or what it can be in terms of a local situation and how it just heightened everything. The challenges that existed with the Olympics exist today. Audiences, media, money, they all exist. They're still here. But it put the massive lens on them in a way. And so if you could get through that and come out of it with feeling like you hadn't lost yourself, or you hadn't lost your organization, or you hadn't lost your spirit about doing all of this stuff, then I think that you would come out of it with a better understanding of actually how to go forward in a perhaps less of a intensified situation. I remember asking Robin Archer, who's a famous presenter, really fine, one of the best in the world, Australian presenter, who was involved in the City of Culture in Liverpool. She left it, actually, after a couple of years. It was a failed situation for her because, from her perspective, they had not created a separate organization. So every artistic decision she made was basically an invoice, a change order to City Council. And I asked her, because we brought her in to speak here at Push one year, and she had just left and it's not a small thing for Robin Archer to walk away from something. She is as fierce as they come and is a real builder of things in Australian context. And I said, so what would you advise? What to do differently? And she said, don't do it. Now, 3-4 years later, you can look up on a website and you can find her name as the artistic director of the Adelaide 150th or 100th anniversary. So she is, in fact, not following her advice and doing it again. It'd be interesting to ask her what made her decide to do it again and if something had fundamentally changed from that first time. Would I do it again? I suppose. Would I do it differently? Or the team of people that I was working with, would we have done it differently? I suppose. But I don't know that under a situation of the IOC that one can do much differently. I'm not sure. There is so much in that culture of that institution, similar to FIFA, that comes in with so much assumption that can and has to be done in a certain way. I'm not sure how much room there is. I do think there are